Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's digital panel. We're going to be diving into the biggest scaling challenges in customer success. We've got three wonderful customer success leaders here, and they're all first-time panelists with us. So Sydney, Max, and Scott, thank you all so much for joining us here today. And we have a little bit of a tradition here. We always like to learn a little bit more about our panelists before we jump into the content of our session. And what we love to learn about our panelists is what they're excited about, kind of as we enter, exit the lockdown and enter this next phase, this next normal, whatever you want to call it. And Sydney, let's start with you. What are you most excited about coming out of this phase of the pandemic?
Yeah, I'm most excited about meeting my team in person. I changed organizations mid-pandemic, so I've never really met more than a small handful that I had previously met at a conference before. So I'm just excited to meet the folks on my team in person. I always feel like it's a game-changing opportunity to build more meaningful, deeper relationships. So that's top on my list.
Oh, that's awesome. You can also figure out how tall everybody is, which is just a mystery right now.
It is. They were betting that I was 5'2" the other day. I'm 5'7". I was like, swing and a miss.
I love it. Excellent. Well, Sydney, thank you. Thank you for having us. Max, what are you most excited about kind of heading into the new normal here?
Yeah, we've got a global team, and it would be really great to link up with them post-pandemic when everyone's vaccinated. But the most exciting thing for me is I have a COVID baby. My son is just coming up on 18 months, and he hasn't met any of his family in Japan. So as soon as we all have our clearance, I'm going to be so excited to introduce him. And we've all been yearning for that day when we can get back together safely.
That's awesome. That'll be a fun trip. It sounds like for parents and baby as well. And then last but certainly not least, Scott, what are you excited about coming into the next normal?
I mean, I think it's already been said, right? We're just all craving human connection. Personally, I am a new uncle. I have a niece that I have not been able to see, that I am dying to see. And just, be around my family. I normally always celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas together, and we have a lot of time to make up for, that's for sure.
Just all the big holidays rolled into one, plus a couple birthdays too.
Yeah, exactly. I think the 4th of July is going to be, a multi hyphenate holiday this year.
A lot of dashes in there, slashes, as it were, and lots of good food too, which is great. All right, folks, we got a great content program here today. We have three wonderful panelists. So we're going to jump into things and let some other folks in. Just by way of background, today's session is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros and Modern Customer Success. For those of you who don't know, we are the world's largest community for revenue leaders. So those are for folks that are in customer success and account management leadership, sales operations and revenue operations, sales management, sales enablement, and the related supporting disciplines. Across our communities, we have about 25,000 members. And our mission is to create an environment for our community members where they can answer questions they may otherwise struggle to solve on their own, whether that's through bringing together a content program with some serious, amazing practitioners like what we have here today, through our online forum, or once we can get back to, as we were all talking about, human contact, get back to in-person events as well. Everything that we do is free for our members. And for those of you who aren't members, you will be invited to join afterwards. But today's session wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship from the team at Catalyst. They handed off to Sydney to say a few words about Catalyst. Sydney?
Yeah, thank you. Well, super excited to be partnering with you. I speak for all of Catalyst on that regard. And yeah, we are in a very fortunate position. We're a customer success platform, and we have the fortune of working with rockstar CS teams like Scott here at Braze and his team, and learn from them. And CS comes in all different shapes and flavors, and is continuing to evolve in terms of its maturity as a function within a business. So super excited to be at the center of it, working at Catalyst and being able to support CS teams as they scale.
Awesome. And for folks who aren't aware, Catalyst is doing some amazing things. And I think they've been one of the longest term advocates for the modern customer success community. And I'll give a free plug for this. If you're not reading The Unicornian, you are definitely selling yourself short. So now onto a little bit more of a heavier topic here. We're going to be talking today about the biggest challenges that organizations face in scaling CS. There is a lot of data, there's a lot of information that we're going to go through here today. But before we jump into our content, I would like everyone, our panelists, to introduce themselves. So you heard from Sydney a little bit, but let's give her a chance to introduce herself. Sydney.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, head of customer success at Catalyst. I came into the CS space unbeknownst to me at the time 10 years ago when I came out of school. Started in support, ultimately moved into a CSM motion in its traditional form of jack of all trades, onboarding, renewals, the whole gamut, and have since over those years stepped into opportunities to oversee global customer success teams, like the one that I oversaw at Envision, which had $1 million contracts and all the way down to a couple $1,000 tech touch motions that you were supporting. So really excited to be here with Max and Scott and yourself, Richard, to chat through scaling CS based on what I've learned over the years.
Hey everyone, my name is Scott Tizilo. I am a Senior Director of Customer Success here at Braze. We are a multi-channel marketing platform that many of you might even use at your own companies. I started at Braze way back in the day, about 5.5 years ago. I was employee 51. So my entire time here has been a story of scale, starting at like 51 employees, and we are now, I believe, over 800 worldwide, with over 80 success representatives spread across all of our different global offices. The challenges of scaling are very different depending on the place you are at as a company, and really looking forward to kind of talking about those differences today.
Hey everyone, Max Davison. I'm a Senior Director of Customer Experience at PandaDoc, and my experience goes back about 8 years with SaaS companies. I've been in sales roles, customer success, and customer success lead roles, and all this time I've found specialty in all the things that work on the back end, like the Salesforce and the Catalysts of the world that help you automate your processes. And super excited to be here today to talk about how we've built stuff as the different teams I've been with have scaled. Thanks a lot.
We've got a lot of experience here, and we're going to be diving in deep to the strategy and some of the tactics. But before we jump into the content, just a few housekeeping notes for our attendees. Please do use the Q&A panel. You can use that to upvote others' questions. You can put comments in there and all of that. Secondly, before somebody puts it in the Q&A panel, session's being recorded. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel and our previous event page about 24 hours from now. It just depends a little bit on how quickly Zoom is processing. And with that, panelists, are we ready to jump into it? Shall we? I love it. Well, today we're going to be talking about a couple different things. First and foremost, finding good talent, I think, is always, it's like an evergreen problem. So we'll spend some time on that. And then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into scaling, right? When we think about that, we're going to think about how do we start to level our teams? How do we build out leveling frameworks? And we've got, as you heard, some really great perspectives on that. And then finally, thinking about how we invest in technology to support our customer success motion. Do we get budget for training and all of that? So with that, Sydney, let's get started with you here. Where and how do you find good talent? Where do you even get started with that? Because CS is such a crazy role.
Yeah, I think you've got to go into it open-minded. I think there's definitely an importance of, first off, you kind of like cover your basis of getting the communication out there on the public forums. One thing we've been super intentional about is, on the DE&I side of things, being able to put job descriptions in more minority group representative, like Slack groups, et cetera, as a way to try and give an opportunity for those in more diverse backgrounds the forefront. But I think, for us, one person always said to me is like, look for folks from enterprise. And I was always like, why enterprise? And apparently they have a very structured training and enablement. They get folks that are young out of school and they have a really rigorous onboarding process. And then they really require them to be entrepreneurial and take on a lot of autonomy themselves. And so you get the benefits of the structure of their system whenever they've graduated from the enterprise scholarship
Enterprise,
program.
you mean enterprise?
Rent a car. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I heard that. I was like, hire from enterprise. What does that met me.
I know. And then I was just kind of like, heard it once. And then we hired someone, unbeknownst to me at the time, that he came from enterprise. And I was like, maybe there's something to this. He's an absolute rock star, incredibly strong on project management, very entrepreneurial. So I think we chatted about this. I've chatted with this with Scott on this before. It's just like, don't be closed off to them having to have like a very particular background. I think there's a lot of skill sets that translate into someone being a very successful CSM. One of the paths that I've been really, impressed by is like an SDR or BDR. One of my strongest hires back at Influitive and at Envision came from that path. And it was a natural path for us at Envision. And so I think looking across the organization as well, that you already, talent you already have who know the business is a huge asset to see if there's a growth and development path from sales, for example, into CS.
Well, it's an interesting one too, with sales development being focused. It's starting to become a little bit more consultative. It's not just about appointment setting. They've got product knowledge and they've got some sales entrepreneurial spirit.
And they're incredibly resilient. They hear the word no, they're fast on their feet. They can pivot based on answers. It's very impressive skill set for a CSM. So definitely a recommendation there.
I love it. And one thing, Sydney, I know you had a lot of thoughts on this when we were in prep, but how do you get kind of the team involved in the screening process to make sure you've got good quality and it's not just like a high quantity, especially in CS roles where there is maybe a lot of interest in them?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that we introduced was a screening of a video submission. So I think, as a CSM, part of it is your personality and how you come across in communication with the customer. So we have this 3-question, submit a video and give us biggest learnings, why you're most passionate about customer experience, best customer experience you've ever delivered, and use it as an opportunity to really flesh out kind of the personality traits that come across in how they support a customer. So that's one way. I think the other piece is just having a defined process and expectation setting for everyone in the interview process so that we're all on the same page in terms of what great looks like in terms of a candidate and where we're willing to flex, right? Sometimes you don't get it all, but you also want to diversify the skill set of the candidates that you're bringing on. Someone who's super strong on the analytics, someone who's super strong on the relationship management, someone super strong on the project management, and then to be able to feed off of one another's strengths. So knowing and setting that structure for everyone in the hiring process to know where we're going to flex, but ultimately what great looks like in terms of the candidate that we're trying to secure.
It seems like that's super, super important when scaling the team. And Max, I know you had mentioned that when you were starting out, there actually wasn't a CS team or really any structure out of the gate. How did you go from there to find the right people to help?
That's right. And actually I would echo a lot of what Sydney says. You need to look at people who have a broad experience across different areas. But backing up, I would say if you're in an organization that doesn't have a large CSM team at all, or you're just starting it, what do you actually need out of customer success? Everyone has a very different idea of what those two words mean. It might be that you need someone to help do upsells or build relationships. You might need a team that is more like what we might call customer support. I would try to level set with the organization's needs at which level of scale they are at. So at Panadoc right now, we're looking at a lot of different types of personas depending on where we might fit them in with a customer segment. That's been really interesting. We've leveraged events like these and communities like Modern Sales Pros to help pick people off of LinkedIn. That's been super successful. We also have a really great referral program. And one of the things that I'm super excited about in the future of our hiring sourcing process is the way that we do our panel interviews. So we have data rooms set up where we would have a potential CSM understand what their day-to-day is like, and they'll present as if a customer was listening. And in the future, we're actually going to be implementing some AI solutions to help vet if that fits our models. And that is super bleeding edge stuff that I'm pumped for.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? So you mentioned, so you give them, is this like a take-home project or is this something they're doing live? Tell us a little bit more about the exercise, because I think that's some, like you said, that's some bleeding edge stuff. I don't want us to miss that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So final stage of an interview, we'll have a panel of different people that they may be potentially working with in the future. Maybe their hiring manager, maybe a couple other CSMs that can give some anecdotal feedback about that presentation. And those sessions will be recorded, and we'll use different technologies to figure out how their speaking pace is. If it fits a model, maybe we're asking them to replicate a quarterly business review, are they hitting on the points that we briefed them on are important for that particular role?
That's awesome. That's definitely some exciting stuff there. And now Scott, from employee number 51 to, what was it, 80 people in the CS organization, how have you, or where have you found some of your most successful CS folks?
It's a good question. There really hasn't been a common background from the most successful CS people we've hired. In fact, I'd almost argue that I'm more hired for traits than backgrounds. Success is a very rapidly growing space. There's a different understanding what success looks like at almost any company you go out to. So if you solely look at just hiring other success people, you're really narrowing your pool of potential talent. There's nothing that can, make up for a really hardworking, smart person that can teach themselves something. So some of the best talent that we have are actually like ex-actors. They're people that can put on a show any day of the week. I need to teach them some of the tech and marketing skills per se. But in terms of like actually having that presence and being able to manage a relationship, they're just great at it. So we sort of have three different skill sets that we look at during our interview process, marketing skills, technical acumen, good old account management. I need you to be like really solid in at least one of those things, and then have clear and obvious interest in growing into other areas. And if you have that fire to learn, you have that desire to work hard, almost nothing can replace that motivation.
I think that's a pretty clever point there, having kind of where you're going to focus training versus what that person's coming in with from a building blocks perspective. Scott, how was that different when you were first starting out, maybe versus now? Or like what's changed in that model or process?
Yeah, if anything, we've just gotten more definition in our internal roles. When I was first starting off, I was one of like 5 post-sales people, meaning we did like everything post-sales. Like we managed tickets, we did all the implementation and onboarding, we were driving towards renewal. And because of that, you had to hire jack of all trades, people that were just inherently flexible and had that kind of scrappy startup mentality. That gets you only so far. You can't hire someone that can do everything for you all the time. And so internally, we've broken apart what post-sales success looks like. We've created a unique integrations and onboarding team. We have a unique support organization now. So the success role has become a lot more clearly defined and a lot more specialized. And in that process, we've been able to make our job descriptions a lot clearer. We've been able to hone our questions a lot more specifically to what success looks like here and what makes it distinct from some other internal functions and things like that. So in many ways, it's about evolving what the internal roles look like and then evolving our recruitment processes to reflect that accurately.
I think that scaling part of like the hiring process, what got you here isn't necessarily going to be what gets you to where you need to get to. And and Scott, you actually started to hit on this a little bit, but let's dive in just a little bit deeper and talk about how the organization itself scaled, right? How did you start to create maybe levels or create specialization? And one of the things that we always hear is it's sometimes difficult to get things like levels and specialization right, because you maybe have jacks of all trades, but they're not great at any one of those. So really walk us through the journey of the leveling and how you scaled the organization from like a role standpoint.
Yeah, it's a great question. It started with thinking about the customer journey, right? What are the major touch points we have with the customer, and what are the unique skills and things we need to bring to the table at those discrete moments in that customer journey? From there, I think we naturally broke some things apart. We recognized that, you really need someone who's highly technical during the integration. They need people that can get our technology up and running as fast as possible. From a tech support standpoint, having CS people manage tickets, it's helpful for them to be informed of tickets, right? They need to know issues that are coming in, but they might not be able to, in the midst of regular client calls, actually be able to dive into that. So having a discrete team that could help move things quickly was really obvious to us. looking at where renewal falls, normally a year or 2 years into someone's contract, how important that is, making sure that we have contractual partners internally that can drive the actual contractual process forward while CS is still focused on strategy and outcomes. So it was all about first breaking apart that post-sales role into discrete functions, specifically looking at that customer journey, and then making sure when we thought about levels, okay, now we have unique teams. What does evolutions look like on those teams and specializing into those? Because really, if you start with levels first and then break into the specializations, you can find that it doesn't neatly map. And then it's really challenging if you've already set someone down a certain career path to walk that back or potentially change how they're looking at what their development looks like.
I think there's certainly a heck of a lot there. And Sydney, you've got a unique perspective, right? You've grown orgs, but you also see orgs that grow as they're working with Catalyst.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think at the end of the day, like similar to what Scott said, like start with solving for the business, because at the end of the day, people's career path, like there's a business dependency that is required in addition to someone's skill set and what they're demonstrating to get to those next levels. So I think always making sure it's very clear in terms of the direction of the business and what the needs are there. I've also found like just putting in place those frameworks to help each respective role understand what great looks like. What is expected of a CSM versus a senior CSM versus a strategic CSM. The more you can guide people through what great looks like, the more they have the autonomy to just guide themselves and consistently be self-assessing themselves. So, on a very tactical level, setting up a scorecard and going like, here's what good and great looks like, and you score yourself. And it's really interesting to see how critical they are of scoring themselves. And then you get to go in and go like, I actually think you're stronger here than you think you are, but I agree this is a development area and this is where you need to go. But I have found that, it doesn't have to be a massive lift, but people just want some sort of governance to know that the effort and, the impact that they're having day in and day out is in the direction that is ultimately going to align to them continuing to grow and to be recognized for the work that they're doing. And I think you can get a huge lift as a leader and a manager in your role by making that really crystal clear and having, forthcoming conversations on a consistent basis and evolve it as it changes, because the business is going to change. But from my experience, that takes a lot of anxiety for folks out of the equation, so they can just focus very intentionally on where they're focusing day to day and their role specifically.
I have two follow-on questions for that, because I think that's easier said than done. But my first question on that is, how does that, do you talk about that when you're in the recruiting process as well with candidates? Like, hey, you're going to have this roadmap for success. Can you share a little bit how that folds in?
Yeah, I get pressure tested often from folks in the interview process, which is like, Sid, if I'm coming on as CSM, help me understand what it's going to take for me to be a senior CSM. I'm like, glad you asked. Zoop, pull up my development path. And I go, look, this is what we're going to walk through, week 3 when you get in here, which is like, this is my expectation of what a CSM is today. And this is where we're going to, get you to be a senior CSM. And at the senior CSM level, you don't have to be checking every single box. I don't think that's the best employee experience to be like, great, you've shown that you can be a senior CSM for 6 months. Now we're going to pay you as one. It's like, start flexing 50% that, column, and we're going to be in good shape to be able to promote you. So it's definitely something, we're vulnerable and transparent about in the, interview process. And it's a consistent conversation, and probably every 2 months have individual development plan reviews with my team in terms of what are those skill sets that we said we were going to focus on, what were the outcomes from our last conversation that we wanted to be able to flex on, and how are we progressing against that. And I think it keeps me accountable as well, because so quickly with all the noise that can happen in a business, like you want to make sure you're taking care of your people and being very intentional about making that a priority for you, and showing it is a priority to them goes a long way in having them know that like you've got their back and you truly are invested in their growth.
It's like, that's a powerful recruiting and a retention tool, and especially for this emerging wave of customer centricity, right? Hanging on to great CSMs, they're like at least worth their weight in gold, probably something more expensive.
100%. Like how many times probably on between Max and Scott and myself have we heard customers, express frustration with the times they've had new CSMs come into the fold to service their accounts. Like you really do have to make a strong investment in the retention of your team because one, great CS folks are hard to come by, and two, like it impacts the customer experience. So really important to make sure that that investment is there and that they feel supported and, are committed to the role long term.
I think there's a lot of fabulous points there. And before we jump to Max, because I want to get his perspective, because I know PandaDoc is doing some cool things. Folks in the audience, please do start putting your questions in the Q&A panel. We'll take some of those as they come. We'll take some at the end, but we've got these panelists here for about another 20-25 minutes. So please do get that in there and let's make the most of this time. Now, Max, I know when we were talking about this, you mentioned there was some sort of clear demarcation around 20 million where you started to see things at PandaDoc. So let's walk us through that from a scaling and leveling perspective.
Yeah, so I've been lucky enough at my past 3 organizations, including PandaDoc, to watch these companies and their CS orgs scale past the 20 million mark. And I really click onto this idea that I think Scott and Sydney were both getting at of strategy before tactics. So I think without a guiding vision for what customer success is and understanding things like who your ideal customer profile from the marketing and sales side is going to be or is right now, and building out those plans for the different segments within customer success. We're talking about partnership level, upmarket teams, commercial teams, tech touch teams. Where's the business going to grow? And we actually start backwards in that way and build out metrics for how those teams should scale with the business's operating plan. So we have different activity metrics or different engagement metrics that we would grade everyone by, and there's a very clear pathway for each rep to work their way up into different roles. And we actually have other teams feed into customer success, like our support team, and I think it was mentioned before, BDRs. Found also that that's worked really well for us, and we're using customer success as a stepping stone for them to get into other parts of the business. So in and out, I think we have a great program that is built around the business's needs.
I think that part of having those ratios kind of well understood and saying, hey, the operating model expects this much revenue from tech touch. That's going to result in this much activity. Therefore, we're going to need to hire X, Y, and Z number of people. One thing, and I want to actually kind of go around to the horn on this point. We talked about leveling. One part that also comes up is development of sort of mid-level managers or growing managers inside of the organization. And this is a question that comes up. It's a big retention point as well. But I'd love to get perspective on best practices for growing that next generation of leaders in the organization. And I apologize, I'm putting you all on the spot with this. We didn't talk about it too much in prep, but I do think we'd be remiss not to discuss it when talking about building and scaling organizations. And Scott, let's get started with you on that. Just any thoughts on how you make sure you're kind of growing that next generation of leaders inside your organization?
Absolutely. You need to constantly be thinking about it, right? At its core, starting to move down a management path is about mentoring people and being excited in somebody else's growth. When you really become a manager, it's the first time in your career where your success is about growing other people, not necessarily growing just yourself. So starting with management and mentorship opportunities with your individual contributors early and often, I think is really important. Things like an internship program are great opportunities for people to dip their toes into what management looks like. We also take a pretty firm stance internally that our first-time managers are player coaches. We give them something that's a net new skill for them, managing a small pod of people, while also giving them something that we know that they're good at, managing some big accounts, so that they have one foot firmly planted in the past and one foot firmly planted in the future. There's lots of pros and cons to fostering player coaches. I don't think it's a long-term path for people. It's like normally they spend a year and a half in that role before they kind of graduate into a full-time manager position. But having that runway from a individual contributor through a player coach to just being a coach, I think is a really nice way of kind of ramping them into a new skill set while not totally overwhelming them with an entirely new set of responsibilities.
You want to be a manager? Here you go. Go figure out how to swim. Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's a great point there. Sydney, what else do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think delegation is huge, right? Like, giving folks a shot at bats. There's a lot that we take on as leaders that, we can do day in and day out, but it's also an opportunity to put someone else in a position to take leadership as a potential future manager. There's lots of opportunities, I would say, even in the context of onboarding new employees and having like a buddy program. If someone wants to be a future manager, pairing them up with new employees, getting them ramped, mentoring them, to Scott's point, helping with their overall entry into the company can go a long way. And, it goes back to kind of on a tactical level, that framework that I spoke about, when a member of my team says, hey, Sid, I want to be a manager, it's like, okay, great, let's shift that dialogue to here are some of the skills and what I expect to be demonstrated in order for me to feel confident that when a management opportunity opens up at the business level, that it's like a shoe in, boom, you're there. I think of a member on my team who I recently moved to a manager position, and he expressed day one, to your point, Richard, in the interview process, he's like, so Sid, what's my path to manager, right? I was like, okay, we're going to play that game. I'll tell you what your path to manager is. And I also look at it as like, how can I get lift in myself, right? And, Kyle's super ambitious. He wants to take on this opportunity. I love that. Let me use that opportunistically for myself to go like, where can I get some leverage from Kyle, give him growth and development, me be there to coach him through it and be patient as, he's first time doing it, but knowing that like when an opportunity for the business arises to sub a new manager in, I'm like, Kyle's the guy, because he's been showing for the last 7 months that he can step into that role. So I think, like, to Max's point of having a vision, you have to have a vision of that next management opportunity. And what do you need this individual to tell you today that they're capable of doing? Not just tell you, but show you they can do, and then coach against that, so that it is a, green light, go the second that business opportunity shows up.
I think that's a great point. It's funny too, right? Like, oh, cool. So when am I going to be a manager? Like, walk me through what that scorecard looks like. And that's a powerful recruiting tool. I love that. And then Max, anything else from your take on just how kind of growing that next generation of leaders internally?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a process guy, if you haven't figured it out yet. And I think that you have to have a formalized process, things like 6-month reviews, weekly check-ins, looking at the KPIs, and also understanding and investing in your customer success managers, or really for the matter, anyone else in the org's personal goals. And one of the mistakes, I don't know that this has been highlighted, that I've seen made in a couple organizations I've joined, which we quickly corrected, was having a success leader who also managed accounts. So if you have those out there, folks on the call, that's something that I would douse as quickly as your organization allows, so that you can have your leads invested in those growth plans that they're building out with their direct reports.
I think another point on this, I think that's a great point. Another point on this too, and Max mentioned this, but like, make sure they want to do it. I know this happens a little bit more in sales, but there's often well, Sydney, you're the top rep, so now you're the manager. And it's just like, well, maybe she just wants to be the top rep. It's an important thing to keep in mind here as well.
I think an attribute is like, how natural are they at sharing with their peers their learnings, right? I think that's where I've been able, to distinguish, is this person going to be a killer IC, and that is like a very strong path for them, and that's a very respectable path, or are they someone, like to Scott's point, that is feeling more fulfillment in the success of others by virtue of sharing their learnings and investing them in them, than they are like, boom, I see my number and that's the number I'm going for, like no holds bar, I'm getting there. So I think, there's personality traits that start to shine through that lean towards like, you'll be a killer IC if that's the path you choose, or like you have all the makings of being not just a manager, but a leader. Right. And I think it's like, if they are someone that truly is indexing on, vulnerability, transparency, sharing failures, sharing successes in an effort to help others around them grow, then they're indexing very much on like a natural manager leader level.
That's an incredibly important point, right? You can see managers, you can see leaders, but you really want both of those things here. And there's actually a great question that's coming in live. And Scott, I'm going to put this at you, because you had mentioned, you talked a little bit about the team lead role versus the manager role. So Scott, let's start with you. Max, I know you've got some perspective here too, but what's kind of the difference there between that team leader player coach and then pure coach?
Yeah, great question. Team lead is player coach, right? Divided responsibilities, probably 60% management, 40% individual contributor work. The goal as I see it is to be really on the ground in the day-to-day of your team's work and really getting into the nitty-gritty of what servicing individual accounts looks like. There's a level of, I think, roll up that occurs when you move into the manager path, right? Your purview has expanded. You're probably overseeing a lot more people, at least downstream of the org that you're in charge of. And so at that point, when you're thinking about becoming a manager, it's all about managing not only individual contributors, but also first-time managers. And what that means, managing a manager is just an inherently different skill set. And it's also about, like Sydney said, delegation, right? Like a team lead's able to get into the details of their staff, probably because they have fewer staff and fewer responsibilities. There's no expectation that you can be that involved in the day-to-day as a manager. So you need to find ways for you to have eyes and ears on the ground and to foster proper roll-up reporting from your team into you so that you really do have a good sense of what's occurring, because you can't be everywhere at once.
That's a great perspective. And Max, I know you were typing, you were about to throw some answers in the chat panel, but anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I would expand that. I think part of that skill set of the manager versus the team lead is being able to connect the whole of the business to issues or gaps in their respective part of the funnel. So manager might be talking about the causes, blockers, and then the actions they need to follow up on to fix the renewal process or to close on more expansion. A team lead is going to work on those tactics. So you need, again, I think Scott said this, but someone who has boots on the ground with their reps and can get dirty on the front lines if need be.
There's a lot here, and there's another question coming in here too. But before we jump to that, Sydney, any other thoughts on the team lead versus manager and how folks can think about the differences between those roles?
Full transparency, I've never had team lead in any of my 10-year career. And so it's always something I'm actually super interested about because, I have found myself in predicaments where there isn't quite yet a management opportunity, but you have those that are looking to go on the management path. I've always coached against well, here are the management skill sets that we should be working on in the context of your IC role, but it's something that I'm learning from Scott and Max, just hearing how they've approached it, because I haven't had the opportunity to see it live in action in any of the roles that I've had.
It's an interesting one, and I think we see this sometimes on the sales side too, with sales development, like SDR team lead. And one of the important parts that everybody's hit on here is the coaching and development. That's not a person that's in that role in perpetuity. You're building, whether there's a roadmap for skill development, or Scott, like you're saying, there's sort of this progressive layers of responsibility. I think that's incredibly important not to forget. That person is not just there to do the work that you're delegating for forever. There's a timeline associated with it. We're going to move on to our final conversation point here around just tech and training for teams. So folks, keep putting questions in the Q&A panel. We'll get to as many as we can before we start to wrap here. But the last thing, and this question comes up kind of all the time, is thinking about technology, right? There's tools for everything under the sun out there, and it's growing at a pace that's not ever been seen before, especially to enable our success as revenue leaders. Scott, how do you think about tooling when, Braze has got to have a bunch of tools that you're using? How did those come in? How should our audience think about them, to help us?
Oh, gosh, it's a really tough conversation. It's a tightrope, right? Tool bloat happens very naturally in companies, especially as you're growing, right? We have new functions, we have new things we're trying to do as a company. We need a tool to help us do it. And therefore you gain a bunch of different tools and they don't play really nicely together. And it's just all of a sudden you're asking your team to remember 8 different systems across 5 different tools, and they don't talk to each other well. And adoption is low because of that. Consolidation is important, right? We need to look at what the day-to-day responsibilities are, our ICs are, and how easy it is for them to navigate through the various tool bases, while also recognizing that a one-size-fits-all tool typically doesn't work very nicely. You can't expect one tool to really achieve everything that you need it to. We have a pretty important philosophy here, at least in terms of how we are thinking about our tool development. At a bare minimum, it's important to have a concept of like Grand Central Station, right? This idea of like a hub where people can go to an account, see all the information on that account, and then be really quickly routed to other places in the organization, other tools, if they need to get information that's not fit for purpose in that main central hub. A good example of this is like Google Docs, right? Like you have all these one-off Excel docs or Word docs that you want to share with clients, but it's really easy to put that also within like your Salesforce instance. And really Salesforce should not be a file repository in that exact same way, but making sure that you can easily link through to a Google Drive folder of all of a client's activities, I think is really important. So we try and consolidate our tool stack as much as possible, and then really make it as easy as possible for our CSMs to understand, okay, of the various tools we have, here's where you go for what information. At least that's the goal. We're constantly striving for that, and finding areas that we fall short and building on top of processes and tools to fix our gaps.
Well, it feels like it's an area of continuous improvement, not perfection, right? As businesses scale, it's like, I love the way you framed it, Scott, where it's like, yeah, this is a natural thing. It's actually probably a good thing because you've got more budget and all of that. But Sydney, I remember when we were prepping, you did mention something about how kind of who you hire factors into how you think about tech. And I think it was a really great point.
Yeah, it's a good question. Probably you may have to remind me of what exactly we specifically covered. But yeah, I mean, I think that diversifying the skills and strengths of the folks that you have on your team can very much help. But I think most importantly, like you've got to understand what you're solving for at the business level first, and then identifying, what are the processes to be followed, and then how do you operationalize that, and then certainly staffing against the requirements of being able to build the processes and then execute the processes in the intention that it is. For us at Catalyst, it's a very unique position of like building a CS team that serves CS professionals. Like the bar doesn't get higher in terms of the audience and their expectations of what it is that you're delivering on, right? QBR is not just got to be a QBR. It's got to be like the best dang QBR they've seen. Instead, they're taking notes to go like, here's how our team's going to run a QBR. So I think you have to start with like the context of your business. What is it that you're trying to solve for? What is it that you're trying to deliver? What are the technologies and the systems that will allow you to do it? And then what are the skill sets of the people to help make it happen? Otherwise, it just is a vision.
I don't think I needed to prompt you at all. You nailed that. You set our expectations so low, over exceeded everything. Great. Just to highlight a few points that both Sydney and Scott have mentioned here. Figure out what your process is before you start throwing tools at problems, because otherwise you're going to end up with a wonderful, joyous experience with a bunch of tools that aren't helping you do anything. And now, Max, PandaDoc has, what was it, 500 different vendors that you had mentioned, or something like that?
We're coming close to it. And that's not just for customer success, that's the whole organization. And I'm sure there's a varying number of users for each one of those tools. But I've come in at an interesting time where we have this beast that we need to wrestle. And so we're going way ahead of all of our renewals with vendors and backing up to the bigger picture, that vision that I talked about, and asking at a minimum, what are the 5 whys? Why do we need this tool? What is it doing for us? Why? And we're trying to map out the current state of how all of our different processes are mapped. And most importantly, how that's actually making the customer experience better. And so I imagine over this next year, I'll be doing a lot of vendor evaluations, and I would love learning about the bleeding edge tech that's out there, but it can definitely get in the way. Scott brought up a good point. If your systems don't integrate, that's going to be a huge issue that you need to make sure you solve for, because you want to keep people focused on the right work. And I think all of that comes back to mapping out why you're looking at a tool and what that performance gap is that you're trying to fill in for the business.
And
I think it's also so critical to think of like the lift associated with onboarding someone to, the more tools you have, the more knowledge, like the learning curve is just like ever increasing. So, to Max's point, being incredibly intentional about, the disciplines of, do we need a new technology? Why do we need a new technology? What is the pain that it's going to solve for? Because every new tool you've got to train and enable someone on, you then have to staff with operations, you then have to staff with changes to it. I mean, in CS, you're fielding so much information and pure volume. Every time something changes, that's now something you got to roll out to Scott's 80 some person CS team. Like, try and get everyone marching in the same direction when you're doing that across 30 different tools. Like, no dice.
Yeah, absolutely agreed on that. The other thing that you run into is that you have information fracture in your organization, right? Like, almost every tool has a note-taking functionality to it. Like, it's really amazing that that's just like a core feature. But that means that if you have like 9 different tools, all with their own unique notes, getting a singular view of all of your notes in one location can be, oh my gosh, a gargantuan task. So making sure that you just know, like, where does information live? Like, what is my one place that people are taking notes? That in and of itself is a remarkably complex question for a lot of organizations to answer. And if you don't know where the information is, then your tool stack's too complicated.
You mean it's not as easy as saying check Salesforce anymore, and we're past that? Damn.
Right, exactly, yes. And what syncs with Salesforce correctly, and when does it sync with Salesforce? And, oh gosh, I mean,
I'm sure there's some ops people on the call right now that are just like, oh my gosh, no, please. We're gonna move on. We got a bunch of questions coming in here. Some really great questions. We're gonna jump to live Q&A for as long as we can. First question that came in, and actually Danielle, great having you on here. Danielle Marquis runs, she's SVP of RevOps. So it's an interesting question that she's bringing to us here. In terms of tooling, how important is it, and when do you bring on a specific CS focused tool versus kind of stretching existing tools, as long as the customer experience is smooth? Is there a sort of a point that you've seen? And Max, let's start with you on this, and then Sydney, obviously we want to get your perspective here too.
I'm sure she has a great opinion for this as well. So from my perspective, I think the point when we started looking at customer success specific platforms was when there was too much red tape involved to append a CS process to our Salesforce instance. We need to be able to enact those automations and all the different CS processes without having to go to other teams and send things in and out of all the very important databases. It's good to have all of that sending to a specific platform that CS can do everything in on their own, of course, with ops help or whoever is standing those platforms up. That's the approach that we took.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much more to add than what we said. Like, don't add something you don't need, right? If there isn't an explicit pain and you're missing something that you're trying to solve for the business, like, do you really need to add something new? No, like, probably doesn't help me selling Catalyst, but at a certain point, there is a profile of customer that needs Catalyst, and that's, the profile we should be serving as a business. I don't think you should introduce something if it's unnecessary and not adding value. But I will say, to Max's point, like, that is a very consistent attribute of customers pursuing Catalyst, which is like, I am so dependent on sales ops to do anything for my team because it's in Salesforce. And guess what? I'm third string. Priority 1 sales, priority 2 marketing, priority-ish 3 CS. And it's like, God forbid they ever get to the CS to-do list. So that is definitely something where, like, you hit a certain threshold, I think, in the growth and the complexity of the different organizations and the functions within those, where, like, CS outgrows the ability to do it in Salesforce. 1, because of just the features and functionality of the product and what it can do. And 2 is when you just you're bottlenecked by an operations resource that can't give you what you need in terms of trying to stretch it maybe a little further.
A lot of great points on there, and we love making sure that the ops people can delight all of their friends in revenue generating orgs. But I do think, Sydney, that's a really great point, where at some point in time, the complexity of the CS motion is such where it's like a no-brainer. It's cheaper than bringing on a full-time ops person to service CS, right?
Yeah. And the sophistication, I think, gets to a point, right, when you're starting to do, more complicated, sophisticated functions like health scoring and, triggering tasks based on certain data and insights relative to product adoption. And you're trying to get to a place where it's a little bit more streamlined and efficient in that capacity. And that's when, like, the tools will start to break down and there'll be gaps that are exposed, and you may start exploring other options.
That was a master class answer right there from two amazing practitioners. I want to change gears a little bit. We're talking tech for a while. I want to actually take it back to mentorship, right? We talked a lot about team leads, managers. Question came in from Heidi around how important is mentorship, right? Should that be external or internal? And this is from a coaching and a skills development standpoint. And Scott, let's start with you on this to get your perspective, and then we can get Sydney's and Max's on this as well.
I think there are a few more important things to foster, honestly. It's so important to create a culture of people helping one another. It just allows you to scale so much easier down the road. There's very much in Braze this sense of paying it forward. There's a pretty heavy ramp period to get people familiar with the role here. And we often lean very heavily on our existing experts on our product, on our tool to help train in people that come in. And then once those people train and get experienced on the product, they help train the next round of new people that come in. So we really do leverage mentorship as a means of training and educating people, onboarding them as quickly as possible, but then also creating this environment of everyone paying forward to other people and fostering and up-leveling one another. We've just grown at such an incredibly fast pace here and added so many people to our organization that you're constantly looking for ways to make someone feel welcome when they're new inside an organization. So mentorship has been absolutely critical to ensuring that we bring people in and make sure that they have a good onboarding. But then also for the people that have been here a long time, again, mentorship is the first step towards people management, making sure they're ready to be people managers. And it's really about fostering the next generation of leaders here at Braze. So mentorship is just, I think, really, really critical internally, and making sure that you have really robust mentorship programs and processes inside your organization, I think is a great ROI as a leader to set that all up. We also have focused a lot on recently in particular and leveraging things like the coaching corner and whatnot to put CSMs in touch with other leaders outside of Braze. But at a bare minimum, I think focusing on internal mentorship is totally crucial to your ability to scale.
I think that, and Sydney, I know you had some thoughts too on the internal versus external mentorship as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like big with everything Scott just said, which is the importance of incorporating that into the culture and the expectation, right? And I think, you again, double down, particularly when someone says, I want to be pursue a management path, that mentorship is a critical demonstration of your ability to lead to that. But I do also think in the context of Heidi's question, like if you're not getting it in your organization today, seek it. Like, definitely go external, definitely get what you need. In fact, I was on a panel several weeks back and was blown away by this CS leader. And I was like, do you want to mentor me? Like, is that an option here? Because I feel like you've got some incredible strengths. There are areas that I consider myself to be weaker in, and I would love nothing more than to use you as a sounding board to help up-level me in this area where I really would like to get stronger. So, that was not because I'm not getting great support and mentorship here at Catalyst, but it's because I also saw someone with an incredibly strong skill set in an area I want to double down on, and she was willing to do it. So I think, yeah, definitely not being afraid to seek out people that, resonate with you in terms of what they've been able to accomplish, maybe where their area of expertise are. I think people just sometimes vibe. And if that person vibes for you and you're like, I think I can learn from them, throw out the ask. The worst they can say is no, or not right now.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit onto that. So at Panelist, I think we're really super lucky to have a culture built up around us that is people first. And while I'm definitely a Reddit, LinkedIn lurker late nights, like most of us through the pandemic, and I'm always trying to send DMs to everyone and ask them what's up with their CS, I love that we have skip levels at PandaDoc. It's so simple, but the fact that I can go to our CFO and skip a couple levels of our org hierarchy to ask about the business or to ask about my personal growth it's a really big deal to me. And we do that at all the different parts of the organization. And I think it's made a big impact. Shout out to Richard Bray on our team, who's like my Yoda. And he always has the simplest answers to the questions that are on my mind.
I think, yeah, skip levels. Skip levels are a great way as well to get broader context on what other career opportunities could be out there. We talked about the career pathing part at the beginning. Sometimes those folks see things in you that maybe you otherwise wouldn't see in yourselves. But panelists, this has gone by incredibly quickly. We're up for key takeaways now. So for this, just one key takeaway for our audience, one thing that you want everybody to leave here with. Scott, let's start with you, and then we'll have Max and Sydney share theirs.
One thing, gosh,
One thing.
We've talked a lot about a ton of really rich topics here about scaling out your team. When we think about growth and scaling, one of the things that mattered really importantly to us was how you onboard people, and making sure you have a very robust training program that also I think ladders into a mentorship program. I think is one of the best things that you can do for yourself. Ideally, you are growing at a pace that requires you to bring on lots of new people. That's always the goal, right? Business is good, so we need new heads. That's often where you face so many pains, and minimizing your growing pains through having a really robust onboarding process that's tried and tested and iterated on, I think is one of the best investments you can make in yourselves.
Awesome. Matt, key takeaway?
Well, I'll leave everyone with another CS SaaS acronym, and it's focus as a service. I think that we practice that really well at Panadoc, and there's a lot of work to be done, but making sure that the business, your revenue teams like CS, and then your operation and finance teams are all connected along the same priorities is such a big deal. Everyone needs to be targeted towards the same goals and action on solving those.
And finally, Sydney.
Yeah, one of my big takeaways is actually just learning from Max and Scott around the player coach model. I would be lying if I said I wasn't intimidated by the number of people I'm interviewing that are like, I want to be manager, I want to be manager. And my biggest fear is like, will there be enough opportunity in the business? We're growing quickly and that's super exciting. But at the same time, I want to set these people up for success and I want them to be longtime Catalyst employees. And so I think there's ways that from my learnings here on today's call to see what I can do more creatively from a player coach model if there aren't as many opportunities as there are individuals who are seeking that management path to get them that kind of step in the right direction and feeling confident that it's inevitably going to happen. So appreciate the insights, Max and Scott, to help get my thinking in order there.
Love it. Lots of good points. And we love it when panelists are learning from each other. Sydney, Max, and Scott, I know you're super busy. Thank you so much for taking some time today to share your perspective and insights with everybody. On behalf of Taylor and Nora and the whole team behind the scenes, all the folks who join live and the folks watching this in the future on YouTube, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, all.
Thanks.